Well, I think that the problem is you look at the indictment and if you just read it by itself and you assume that everything in it is true and you kind of ignore a lot of the conduct of the DOJ team in getting to this point, it can look that way. However, as a criminal defense attorney, one of the things that I do for a living is I take documents like this, I look at them a little bit more skeptically, I then go through the evidence to see if it actually matches up. And oftentimes it doesn't. DOJ oftentimes will bring indictments where by the time we get to discovery, we realize these aren't true. Or they're certainly not as airtight. Maybe there are 30 witnesses that say something one way, a couple that say something the other way, and they'll just write what some of the witnesses said instead of the rest.
Okay, well,
so
Tim, what specifically?
Just because it looks damning.
Specifically?
The thing that jumped out to me specifically is kind of the big hurdle that they're going to have to overcome is the exchange between Trump and Walt Nauta before Evan did his search, which they claim is based on all these video surveillance and phone records. And if that's true, then that's a pretty big hurdle. But at the same time, if that's true, then it's something that they would have used before now to try and convince Walt Nauta to change his story. And so the manner in which the investigation was conducted surrounding that undermines the credibility of that.
All right, I understand your point, but I'm not sure that the body man or the personal aide or the valet is central to this case. I think some of the most damning evidence comes from Trump's former attorney, Evan Corcoran. And so on that note, I wonder, because as you know, the crime fraud exception was used, granted by a federal judge, to pierce the attorney-client privilege, which then allowed the notes and voice memos to be administered, in which, if you believe what is in the indictment, is more evidence that Donald Trump continued to try and obstruct a federal investigation in an effort to return these presidential records. Do you believe that Trump's new attorneys will try and dismiss the testimony of Evan Corcoran?
I think that the testimony of Evan Corcoran is something that will be suppressed because I believe, Judge Howell's decision on the crime fraud exception there was wrong. And I think it is something that Judge Cannon will have to reevaluate. Unfortunately, when you're litigating these issues in the context of grand jury proceedings, because of secrecy laws, it's not the same as when you ordinarily litigate a motion. The government puts forth their case, which the defense is not allowed to see. We then have to respond to arguments that we're not allowed to read or know what they have argued. And ultimately, the judge makes that decision based on really only hearing intelligent, coherent arguments from one side because the other side is totally in the dark. Now that we've actually gone through this and seen all the notes, it's clear to me that these are proper attorney-client communications, not something that should ever have been disclosed. And if you look at those specific discussions, what he's asking there is...
Even if it was in furtherance of a crime?
What?
Tim.
But
Tim, I want to ask you on
just
that
because you charge
I understand that. I agree. Everybody believes. I know this is a very, very rare exception. This is almost never pierced. Attorney-client privilege is never pierced.
Correct.
But my understanding is that Judge Howell, who allowed the crime fraud exception, said that the government made a prima facie showing that Trump committed a criminal offense and that the evidence was a transcript of audio notes that Corcoran made. I mean, this is so rare. And Trump lost this before a grand jury. So, again, give me your best argument about why you think this will be suppressed.
Because Judge Howell, in my opinion, got it wrong. She didn't hear from the other side. We weren't able to fully litigate the motion. And now that you see what's in the notes, it's clear that she got it wrong because these are attorney-client privilege communications. He's asking about what are we required to do? What are we allowed to do? And one thing that's kind of lost in what's in the indictment is the context here where he's specifically saying, look, I read about when Hillary Clinton got a subpoena and David Kendall deleted 33,000 emails. Are we allowed to do the same thing because they didn't get into trouble? You want clients to ask you those kinds of questions. You want to encourage them to ask those kind of questions so that they understand what their rights are, what their responsibilities are, but you want them to discuss that in an attorney-client privileged environment. And I think that the precedent that Jack Smith is trying to set here is extraordinarily dangerous, because what he's trying to set here is if you ask a question to your attorney that the answer is no, then the government is going to try and pierce attorney-client privilege and then charge you for asking a question. It's very dangerous. It's very unconstitutional. It's not something that he should be doing or that anybody in DOJ should be doing. And any attorney who has actually counseled clients who have received grand jury subpoenas will look at this with the full context and know there's nothing criminal about that exchange, and so therefore it should never have been disclosed. You know, there is potentially a crime fraud exception argument for Evans saying when he was going to do the search, just that piece of it, so that could be in furtherance of when Walt Nada moved the boxes. That doesn't mean you give over all of these other pages of notes and all of these other attorney-client privilege communications, and I think that did irreparably taint the grand jury proceedings. And moreover, Judge Howell, when she rendered that decision, she didn't give us the opportunity to appeal. Ordinarily, you have a couple of days to appeal before they hand over the notes, and you go to the circuit and you try and stay it. She didn't wait. She immediately gave the notes over to the prosecutors, thereby mooting the appeal so that we wouldn't be allowed to go up. So that's something that I think that the trial judge is going to take a hard look at, and really I would expect that this would get reversed and go back and say, no, this was not properly disclosed.
Tim Parlatore, former attorney for Donald Trump. Thank you, Tim, for joining us. And just for those following along at home with a printed out copy of the indictment, like I am here, sitting outside where there's cars honking behind me and a helicopter, so if it's a bit noisy, I apologize. But for those following along, on page 21 of your indictment, right here, you can see, is the actual exchange between Trump and Trump Attorney 1, where Donald Trump says, I don't want anybody looking. I don't want anybody looking through my boxes. I really don't. I don't want you looking through my boxes. And then Trump says, well, what if it happens we just don't respond at all or don't play ball with them? C, wouldn't it be better if we just told them we don't have anything here? D, well, look, isn't it better if there are no documents? And as summarized in the beginning of the indictment, the special counsel alleges that Trump suggested his attorney falsely represent to the FBI and the grand jury that Trump did not have documents called for by the subpoena. That is, according to Judge Howell, why they were able to pierce this attorney-client privilege. I want to bring in Scott Frederickson. He is a former federal prosecutor. He is also with us. And Scott, let's drill down on that very argument. I mean, in your mind, how crucial is the evidence provided by Trump's former attorney, Evan Corcoran, in this indictment?
Well, that evidence is absolutely crucial. It's part of the obstruction case. In this case, as much as it is about classified documents, it's about the obstruction of the criminal investigation, all that occurs after the subpoena. So it's not a surprise that they will attack the evidence stemming from Evan Corcoran's notes. That said, Judge Beryl Hall wrote a detailed memorandum to support her holding. There are overwhelming facts supporting why the attorney-client privilege was pierced here. And it does happen, but it only happens when there's clear evidence of an attempt to commit a crime. And it's hard to imagine anything more clear than the notes of the attorney himself. Look, the reason he made those notes is because he was scared. He just had his client ask him, hey, wouldn't it be better if we just didn't have any documents? What if we just don't play ball? What if we just say no? And then he recounts the situation where his client says, well, take a look at these documents that he's supposed to review. And he does a plucking motion according to Mr. Trump's own attorney, which he interpreted as get rid of them. Now, If that's not enough, we also have the evidence that I suspect Judge Howell had that resulted in the false certification to the government that all the documents had been supplied, when in fact they had not. You've got videotapes of the boxes being moved around to mislead Evan Corcoran himself, so he didn't know what all the documents. That's overwhelming evidence. You won't see a stronger case of the crime fraud exception than there. So I think we just heard one of the main defense arguments here. But that's not going to carry the day. There's a very strong factual basis. Judge Howell held hearings on it, wrote a detailed memorandum opinion to support the basis of it. No one takes this anything but seriously, but that's going to stand up in this case.
Got it. And Scott, I'm going to get Ricky Kleeman on this in just a minute, but I just want to ask you about what's happening behind us right here in this federal courthouse. Describe what's happening to Donald Trump right now as he has been booked and is appearing before this magistrate.
Right now, he's likely seated in the ceremonial courtroom. There's a big crowd in there, reporters who are all dying to get on the phone and talk. The judge, the magistrate judge, is speaking and advising him of his rights, including the right to have the indictment read to him, which he can waive, and ultimately he will ask how Mr. Trump wishes to plead. The former president likely will state in very clear tones, I plead not guilty. Then, in all likelihood, the next date for the hearing before Judge Cannon will be set. Doesn't have to be. Judge Cannon may issue an order on her own, setting up a schedule for the first hearing to set dates for pretrial hearings, for motions, briefing schedule, and potential trial date. We won't see that today. We won't see that until the first hearing by Judge Cannon.
Scott Frederickson, thank you. Want to bring in our CBS News legal analyst, Ricky Kleeman. And Ricky, as we talk about what options the Trump's attorneys have, I mean, are they limited in nature? What do you think their best effort is in terms of this, delaying a trial?
The defense always looks at delay, 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 and Donald Trump is the champion of delay. At the same time, you're going to see motion upon motion to dismiss in this case, because that's the only place that they can put their eggs in that basket.
And how will they do that?
They will have deadlines to file motions to dismiss. And I think that they will file various motions. Another motion we've just heard argued very eloquently on the part of the government's point of view by Scott and the part of the defense point of view by Tim Parlator. Big hearing on the issue of the testimony of Evan Corcoran and the crime fraud exception to break the attorney-client privilege. Remember, Nora, we're in another jurisdiction. We have another court, and we have the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. The issue about whether or not Evan Corcoran can testify against his own client is an issue that is going to delay this trial because it must be decided before the trial begins.
And what about Judge Eileen Cannon? She is the newest judge in the Southern District Courts. She has ruled deferentially for Trump last summer, assigning an arbiter, remember, to look through the documents seized by the FBI at Mar-a-Lago. What impact do you think she'll have?
She can have a great impact because of the advantage to defendant to delay. This is a rocket docket jurisdiction, Nora. That means the cases are supposed to go to trial, which will never happen, within 70 days, or at least within 6 months. She has the ability, with a motion to dismiss practice, with discovery deadlines, to make this case go on and on if she chooses to do so. If she wants to go by rocket docket deadlines, this case will go very fast. A lot of power in the judge.
Ricky Kleeman, thank you. Want to bring in Robert Costa on this matter. And Robert, what about the location of this potential trial and Judge Cannon?
We're going to learn a lot, Nora, in the coming hours about how this is going to unfold, about whether the next appearance will be in Miami for this case or whether it will end up in West Palm Beach. Behind the scenes, Trump allies and lawyers are optimistic about Judge Cannon. They look at how she handled that so-called special master request to review the documents, and they believe that she might have some skepticism about how the government has gone about this case. And that's why in your interview with Timothy Parlatore, you sense a bit of confidence on the Trump side, even among his former lawyers, that because the government was aggressive in investigating these documents and trying to secure them, especially by cutting through attorney-client privilege by having that so-called crime fraud exception, that Judge Cannon could give them a hearing. But the government side of this, based on our reporting, is that the evidence is so widespread, it's piled up so high in terms of details and interviews with witnesses. I have been reporting on this investigation for months, and it's stunning to me as a reporter to see the scope of how many people were spoken to by this special counsel and heard by the grand jury, from those on the janitorial staff to minor low-level aides for the president's political operation, his personal operation, to all the staff at Mar-a-Lago.
You know, Robert, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is you've done so much reporting on this and analysis that even as many people look at this indictment and say it is voluminous in its evidence against Donald Trump, including some of the testimony provided by Evan Corcoran, there is still a discovery process that will go on as part of a trial. And the idea that this indictment is just a selection of what prosecutors have discovered, what else could be out there?
When you step back and think about what's happening today, it's easy to be almost in an isolated state of mind that this is one explosive investigation of a former president. But it's important to remember, and I have to sometimes remind myself, that the special counsel is also still investigating Trump on January 6th, and that's an aggressive investigation as well, still hearing from witnesses. So some of these people in Trump's orbit who have been interviewed on the records case are also being talked to on the January 6th case, which Jack Smith, the special counsel, is helming. So there are two tracks going simultaneously, compiling evidence even as this moves to trial. And there's that looming possible indictment in Georgia. So what they're trying to do, whether it's in Fulton County, Georgia, or with the special counsel in Washington, is see if there will be any cracks with some of these witnesses. Someone like Walt Nauta, he's now been indicted and processed in federal court. Does he start to reveal more as the pressure mounts? We've seen this in Trump investigation after Trump investigation. The government has one real weapon, and that's time, patience, to see if people will break and start to talk.
But Walt Nauta, the president's valet, I mean, you're talking about him breaking with the president, but last night he was breaking bread with Donald Trump over dinner. What's the likelihood that that loyalty could be severed?
Nora, when I sat down in recent weeks with Michael Cohen, Trump's former fixer, he regaled me with stories of the past when you're in Donald Trump's inner circle, you're sitting on a plane that's called Trump Force One, and some of the accoutrements in the plane, even the bathroom, some of the facilities in gold. And it's a lifestyle for some of these aides around Trump that's enthralling. They like being close to power, close to the flame. But ultimately, even for someone like Michael Cohen, the legal pressure becomes too much, and he has become one of Trump's fiercest critics. That's not to say that Mr. Nauta is going to become a Michael Cohen-type figure. But the government has a way of talking to people through these investigations and really laying out on the line if you look at the back of this indictment, what does it have? Prison sentences. And we're not talking about a few months, we're talking about a few decades.
Robert Costa, thank you. Talking about Walt Nauta, who served 20 years in the U.S. Navy, worked in the mess mess at the White House, because the Navy runs the mess at the White House, and then became very close with Donald Trump, and then retired from the Navy and has stayed with the president at Mar-a-Lago. John Dickerson.
May I add just a point back to Eileen Cannon, the judge who will have this matter before her. Possibly favorable to the former president, but we should also remember that previously when she ruled, she was overturned by the appeals court. And when they overturned her decision, they mentioned, the appeals court did, what you mentioned earlier, is the concept of no one is above the law. And the appeals court said in her previous ruling that if her previous ruling were to stay, it would create a special exception which would defy our nation's foundational principle that our law applies to all without regard to numbers, wealth, or rank. So while the judge has tremendous amount of authority, there is also an appeals court above that has already looked at this question of whether a president should have special favor and ruled against the judge. So that is a part of important context here.
Thank you for that. And CBS News has just learned that Trump has entered the courtroom with his lawyers. This is about 50 minutes after being booked. Also in the front row is the special counsel, Jack Smith, and this arraignment hearing has begun. Again, this is the federal courthouse here in Miami, right behind us. That noise that you hear are mostly supporters of Donald Trump who have gathered at some points shouting, "We want Trump." Most of them have on their red, white, and blue outfits and their Trump regalia, here hoping to catch a glimpse of Donald Trump, but we may never see him because he pulled into the garage below this large office building behind us. We should point out that we understand that Donald Trump is in a ceremonial courtroom on the 13th floor, which is about directly across from the law offices where we are. Extraordinary to think Donald Trump now facing these federal charges against him, which are very serious, and even as he does not have a full legal team in order to defend him and for what is expected to be a speedy trial, unless they're able to file these motions to delay things.
Which we know they will do, and then it really that does come down then to the judge.
Mm-hmm. But to build on some of the things that you talked about here, that indictment, you know, we've all read indictments in the past. There's something sort of unique about that one in that it reads like a novel. There are a lot of specifics in there, and I've talked to sources in law enforcement who anticipated some of the questions about the indictment that President Trump, former President Trump, and his supporters might raise. And so everything laid out in that indictment is there for a reason, including those pictures, which I don't know if we show those enough, because remember, those documents were being stored in bathrooms and ballrooms and storage rooms.
And what's important about that is not just that it's
everybody.
kind of amusing,
Hello.
but that it was an attempt to get ahead of the law.
How we doing,
Remember,
folks?
Mar-a-Lago is not his home. He has a residence on what is a resort. It is a club. It's an expensive club to join. I believe it's now a couple $100,000 to join Mar-a-Lago. But this private club,
Hi, folks.
hosted 150 events from January 2001 to 2021.
I hear he has entered the courtroom.
January 2020-21, which is when Trump left office, to August 2022.
Hello, purple
There were
gold anime
150
hero. Hello,
events.
non-binary
We're talking about
superpowers.
weddings, fundraisers, you name
Hello,
it. We're talking
Minkuro.
about more than 10,000
Hello,
people.
anarcho-capitalist bitch.
There's
Hello, fish
Mar-a-Lago
missile.
right
Hello,
there.
metal kitty
So
mom.
they were first in the
Hello,
league
my
in
ass is
gold
dragon.
ball.
Hello, Polly has a
Well, then they
cracker.
had to move that.
Hello,
Then they were in the
Kyryu.
right room. Then
Hello,
they had the
Solazar.
Trump
Hello,
fans who
Mana
could
King.
find out.
Hello,
Then they
Vacant
didn't
Zero.
even
Hello,
get there.
Irked.
So then
Hello,
there
Very
was a
Knifey
storage
Duck. Hello,
area
One
to
Hand
be
Wonder.
cleared out.
Hello,
That
Neuron.
storage area is right by a door that's right by the pool. Everybody
Sorry.
runs out.
I
And
know
right
I'm
by where
running
they
a little
keep
bit
all the
late.
liquor.
Right.
So it's an area where there's lots of staff that work on that property. It's a resort. It's
Had to take a shower. Sorry.
club,
Couldn't be
it's
avoided.
A lot of people hanging around there, walking in and out. Why should documents, as this alleges, that where there are many top secret
Also,
documents
Chad, is that a
that are
white
from
name I see?
7 different
My
of our top
goodness.
intelligence agencies, the CIA,
Guy's been
the
slacking.
DOD, the National Security Agency, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the National
I did say hi to
Reconnaissance
Mint's over
Office,
in Twitch
the
chat.
Department of Energy in charge of our nuclear secrets, the Department of State Bureau of Intelligence and Research. These documents are in a storage room near where the liquor is kept.
Right.
It is pretty.
The bathroom, I know, is amusing for people.
How is
And
Samus?
that's
She's
why.
doing
But
okay.
The storage room, you know, underneath the
She's a bit she's hiding right now. I may or may not have had a little bit of a meltdown over the fact that I couldn't get on my necklace, and it was I just clipped my fingernails, and now at least 2 of my fingers are bleeding, but I'm good now. Everything's fine.
Being asked to be given the responsibility to handle these kinds of secrets again. And the central question of that is, will you be a steward of the nation's most important secrets and national security
okay, though.
for the betterment of the nation, or will you use them for your private...
Oh, very knifey duck. Thank you very much for
Merry
gifting Polly Has His
Arrestmas,
Cracker a sub. Merry Arrestmas indeed. Hey, Rad Little Razzie. Hi, Jan. I did, however, get her a bunch of, like, gourmet canned foods. And she's, quite happy about the food. I'm late. Damn push notifications. Don't worry, VCC TV. What have I missed? He's apparently gone into the courtroom.
security aide, Sandy Berger, comes to mind, who brought a document out in his sock and spent
Yeah,
time.
but not that many documents.
No, I know. That's what I'm
But they
saying,
get
for
busted.
lesser charges.
Yeah.
Let's bring in Robert Costa on this matter, because, Robert, I know you have been to Mar-a-Lago as well, and the idea about these documents being moved around the property numerous times, which are the texts that are detailed in this indictment between Walt Nada and another
BRB.
unnamed Mar-a-Lago
I'm still gonna be here. I'm just
employee.
gonna eat some food because I haven't eaten yet.
Robert Costa.
So far, it looks like everything's pretty calm. Surprisingly.
Forgive me, it's a bit noisy here with a lot of the protests, so I'm going to come back to Robert in just a second. But want to go to Catherine Herridge on this matter because
I gotta say, I was expecting maybe the second indictment to turn out more violent-minded Trump supporters. But I still don't think, I still think they are in denial. I still think they don't really understand how big of a deal this is because they live in their, like, propaganda bubble. They think this is a big nothing burger. They think there's nothing really going on. Or if they do think something's going on, they think it's like, you know, the president is being taken out by the deep state, you know?
That information. I'm going to toss it back to you, Nora, right now.
Catherine Herridge, thank you. I want to go now to Scott McFarland, who has just come out from inside the courthouse. He has new information. Scott?
Moments ago, through his attorney Todd Blanche, former President Trump pleaded not guilty to these 37 federal charges.
Oh man,
and
he's
Todd
done.
Blanche, in fact, said the former president is, quote, most certainly pleading not guilty. The former president sat in navy blue suit, red tie, hunched over at the table, his hands folded at first, then his arms folded, expressionless, not saying a word. It was his defense attorney who stood and said he's not guilty to these charges. The proceedings are ongoing. They're going to talk about release conditions. They're going to talk about future scheduling, the dates of the next hearings. But before the hearing began, the former president was booked. He was processed. Digital fingerprints taken. No booking photo. The marshals deemed it unnecessary. They think there's enough photos of Donald Trump out there to use for the purposes of his prosecution. There's a ongoing proceeding, Nora, that'll take about 4 or 5 more minutes, and ultimately the former president's expected to leave soon after.
Describe the atmosphere, Scott. What was it like?
A packed courtroom in a rather large courtroom on the 13th floor of this federal courthouse in Miami. The former president had all of his attorneys in a row at the table. It's Todd Blanche out of New York. It's a man named Chris Kise, an attorney out of Florida, or who is now certified to represent him here in the Southern District of Florida. His co-defendant, Walt Nada, sat at the same table with his attorney. They're all together at the same table. We noted the judge, Jonathan Goodman, who is handling this case.
It's kind of wild that they aren't allowing like cameras into the courtroom for like these historic proceedings.
As former President Trump. defendant, not as Mr. Trump, not as Trump, but as former President Trump. It's a beautiful courtroom. Chestnut wood walls about the size of a small school cafeteria, royal blue carpet. The former president had a stack of papers in front of him at the defense table, but no pen, wasn't writing, wasn't talking, just sat expressionless, kind of hunched over, hands on the table, then arms folded. His attorney, Todd Blanche, was occasionally whispering things in his ear. But this was a moment the former president knew was happening outside the view of cameras. The federal courthouse is a ban on cameras. He is largely operating and acting invisibly in this courtroom. The Judge Jonathan Goodman gavelled this into session right on time, right about 3 o'clock here on the East Coast. It should be over in short order.
So, Scott, Donald Trump has been inside this federal courthouse for more than an hour now. What's been happening? What do you expect has to be done before he leaves?
Oh, also, we are going to take a look at, like, probably right side broadcasting after this to see how the conservatives are covering it.
Either out of convenience due to the significant security in and outside the courthouse, or potentially for everybody's safety. Oftentimes in this district of Florida, they'll book you in a different building and bring you from the courthouse over to there. They did it right in an empty office space inside the courthouse. He arrived, according to the marshals, about an hour in advance of getting into the courtroom. They took those fingerprints. They took his social security number, his birth date, all the things you get from a criminal defendant for the booking process. As I mentioned earlier, no booking photo in this case, but Donald Trump has an official case number. It's 23-CR80101. Quite a thing for a former president to have a federal criminal case number. He has been assigned a pretrial services officer. This is all uncharted waters, all history in the making here at the federal courthouse in Miami. We expect to hear before the proceeding ends, likely in the coming minutes, what release conditions have been ordered for the former president. What restrictions will he be under now that he's a federal criminal defendant? And likely we'll get a sense of the calendar, at least the next steps in the calendar. Is the next hearing going to be scheduled in a matter of weeks? In a matter of months? And will this case, which was earmarked for West Palm Beach, Florida, the courthouse nearest Mar-a-Lago, actually remain here in Miami? This is a huge, cavernous courthouse that has, I think some people would argue, the security footprint necessary for court hearings and potentially a trial of a former president. It will most certainly be an attraction.
And did we hear from the special counsel, Jack Smith, at all?
We spotted Jack Smith in the front row in one of the wooden benches. The courtroom had 2 pairs of 5-row deep benches for spectators, and it was filled to the brim today. Jack Smith sitting directly behind the special counsel attorney who is presenting this case. That special counsel staffer is named David Harbach. There's another special counsel prosecutor there, an investigator named Jay Bratt. And we go left to right at the defense table. If you're the judge facing the courtroom, at the far left is a man named Stanley Woodward. He's the defense attorney representing Trump's co-defendant, Walt Nauta. Nauta is next to Woodward. Next to Nauta at the defense table was Todd Blanche, the New York City-based defense attorney for Donald Trump, who's also representing him in that Manhattan prosecution. Then there's Donald Trump, navy suit, red tie, papers in front of him, hands folded, saying nothing. On the far right of that table is the other attorney, Chris Kise. At the prosecution, or the special counsel table, you had David Harbach, the special counsel staffer who spoke today, and Jay Bratt. The rows behind the special counsel table included the special counsel himself, Jack Smith, and a number of media members. Behind the defense table, a whole series of media members, and several members of the public who won a lottery to get a seat in the courthouse and in the courtroom for this unique, historic day.
There was a lottery? What?
Jeff the Gaze is here as well, and I know has some questions for you, Scott.
Scott, we know how much Scott loves courtrooms. He was in the courtroom for the Manhattan case as well. And so I was wondering if you could contrast and compare in terms of the former president's demeanor. How did he look today? What was his demeanor, especially if you compare it to the video that we saw at the arraignment in New York City in early April?
Identical, Jeff. Same mannerisms, same body language, same expression on his face. And we had an advantage of perspective today. We were in the overflow room where there was a video feed giving us a head-on picture of Donald Trump. Those in the courtroom only saw the back of his head. We could see his face. We could see his expression. The overflow room is actually the jury meeting room here with 300 seats and a few tiny televisions, so small, the kind of televisions you get in a low-cost hotel room. We watched this on TV and through a feed, and we could see, even through the grainy picture, Donald Trump sitting, no expression, nothing to say, idle at the table with his hands folded.
So,
And cut.
Scott, we know South Florida has a reputation of being one of those areas where court cases move quickly through the system.
Okay,
what do you
Chad,
expect?
Is that guy okay? He looks like he's been crying. Like it looked like he had like shiny tears on his cheeks. Is that the case?
Much during his news conference last week that he is going to seek a
that's
speedy
my
trial.
question, Metal Kitty Mom.
You're right. This is one of those districts in America, the Southern District of Florida,
Oh,
which is
stroke
known
survivor.
as a rocket
Well, now
docket,
I
a
feel like
place
an
where
asshole.
cases move expediently compared to other federal courts in America.
It
But
just
so
looked like
much of
he had
this is going to
tears
be
on
up
his
to the
cheeks.
parties. Does the defense choose to slow this down? Does the defense choose to file motions to potentially delay things or make this case move more sluggishly? That's going to be in the hands of the parties, but this case is still earmarked for Judge Eileen Cannon. We learned that today in the arraignment. Judge Cannon, based in Fort Pierce, Florida, a ways to the north.
Yeah, I mean, like, Iliander, like, good point. Like, he has Secret Service. Like, he's not going to be able to, like, flee anywhere. Like, the Secret Service is kind of like a double-edged sword, right? Like, they keep him safe, but also, like, he can't really escape them.
Just come from inside the courthouse with that detailed account of not only the mahogany and blue curtains, but also
hopefully he's recovering
the
well.
former
True.
president and his legal team sitting next to his valet, Walt Nada, and what's happening inside, as well as the special counsel in this historic arraignment as the former president of the United States has been booked and is now facing 37 federal counts. Scott McFarland, thank you so much. I want to bring in South Carolina Republican Representative Nancy Mace. She worked on Trump's 2016 presidential campaign and in 2021 voted against impeaching Trump in relation to the Capitol assault, but she did not condemn his actions. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I want to ask you, did you read through the whole 49-page indictment?
I absolutely did. I try to educate myself on what's actually happening, but I have to be honest with you. And I'm someone, I've had my ups and downs with Donald Trump over the years. That's been very public, but I just can't get beyond the fact that the precedent for how we handle classified information was first set when the DOJ and the FBI decided not to indict Hillary Clinton, who had a private server, who had classified information on that server, who obstructed justice, wasn't even president, wasn't even a former president, but was going to be a presidential candidate. And that was the precedent that was set.
I've heard you
and
make
yet
this
today,
argument, Congresswoman.
I know, but then I see this today,
Thank you,
and it really
Congresswoman.
is
I've heard
shocking
you-
to me.
Yes.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Get the fuck out.
Because if you read the indictment, you notice that it mentioned the willful retention of documents, and so the distinction that has been made in the case of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump is the willful retention of documents, as is laid out, and a question of obstruction. That the president repeatedly was told about his actions, and he repeatedly obstructed justice. You see any distinction there?
Well, I will I'll say today, when I watch what's happening in this country, the FBI had access to all those boxes in every single room, and the precedent was set under Clinton that she would not be indicted. I think it's worthwhile to have a conversation about how we handle classified information post-presidency. I think that is a worthwhile debate because we want to protect our nation's secrets, okay? I want to get that off the bat. But the precedent was set under Clinton. She had a private server. I can't think of anything more willful than hiding a server in your bathroom in your home. I can't think of anything more willful than using hammers on your own telephone, cell phone devices, and your iPads to obstruct justice and then to be let off. And so if that's the standard, then it should apply to everyone, including Donald Trump.
But clearly you don't think that should be the standard. That's the argument that you're trying to make. So you believe that Hillary Clinton should be held to a different... You think Hillary Clinton should be held to a higher standard, and so then you must also agree, therefore, that Donald Trump should be held to that same high standard.
But that's not the standard, because under Hillary Clinton, she was let go. She was not indicted. She had classified documents on her server. They tried to obstruct it, and she was able to walk away. So if that's the standard, then you had Mike Pence, who had classified documents in his home. Then you had Joe Biden, who had classified documents spread across the country in different boxes, including unsecured in his garage. If Trump's going to be indicted, so too then should be Joe Biden. I also can't get beyond the fact...
Okay, why the fuck are you giving this lady airtime? Why? Why? The big difference here is that Joe Biden complied with authorities when they asked for him to turn over documents. He complied with authorities when they asked to search his home, when they asked to search his business, like his other places of work. He complied with them. That's the reason there's a difference here. Donald Trump did not comply when asked for the documents, and then he deliberately obfuscated the number of documents he had. He deliberately hid documents that he had. He tried to destroy documents that were in his possession. He tried to convince his lawyers to lie on his behalf to conceal the documents that he had in his possession. And that's the difference. It's not the same case.
Than our own president today, by anybody else, and even Hillary Clinton, who was able to walk away
send love to Morning
by
Dove.
obstructing justice, and the Justice Department and the FBI said she did nothing wrong. So if that's the standard, then why is Donald Trump treated differently? At the end of the day, I think that's why, or where, the average American is going to see this headed. It's not the same standard to indict him but not indict anybody else. Now, I think we should protect our national secrets.
I also understand, is it true that
classified information that are unsecured, but Joe Biden had classified information in his garage, unsecured, sitting next to his Corvette, and God knows where else in this country.
Why the fuck are you letting her talk?
Where is that information now?
Kick her off the air.
And Congressman, what happened to that information when it was revealed?
Hopefully it's been collected by
immediately collected?
Right, but he had over
once they found out about it, they returned it.
Of information, including classified documents. So that's the standard. And I think Donald Trump's being treated unfairly here.
So I was asking you about your... I hear you. I was asking you about your district, though. Don't you want to talk about your district? I was asking you about your district.
Yes, and I answered
I understand.
your question,
so does your district include Joint Base Charleston?
All the bases, if you'd let me speak, I said about half of all the bases in South Carolina are in the low country of South Carolina. That I represent on the House Armed Services Committee. I've said it like 3 times now.
And how important is it to preserve
I don't know
nuclear?
If you can hear me or not.
How important? I am having a little trouble hearing you. Sorry, Congressman. It is quite loud here, so my apologies. How important is it in terms of safeguarding America's nuclear secrets?
It is very important. It is of the utmost importance to protect our nation's secrets, period.
Is it now? Then why are you seemingly trying to say it's not that important that Donald Trump stole state nuclear secrets?
In a storage room.
Literally on a stage.
Would that
displayed.
You?
It would absolutely concern me. But again, the FBI had access to those documents, they had access to those boxes, and they had access to all those rooms as well.
Congresswoman, the FBI did not have access to those documents. There was a subpoena for those documents, and then the attorneys for Donald Trump said that they had given all of the documents over, when then that was not true, and then they had to have a raid.
I remember
Yeah.
last summer
Thank you so
that
much,
it was reported
Congresswoman.
and open
I
source at the
apologize.
Thank you so much,
audio
Congresswoman.
Mar-a-Lago.
You're full of shit. Good day.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Man, I really wish CBS, I really wish journalists in general could just tell liars on their program to fuck off, you know? That'd be nice. British media at least does that sometimes, you know?
I think there was some back and forth. There was some misunderstanding. She was misrepresenting what, in fact, the FBI had access to at Mar-a-Lago.
There's no way she made it sound that like the FBI had unfettered access to those documents. Well, they didn't, and that's why there were negotiations and ultimately the subpoena.
Yeah, it was a misrepresentation, to be clear, of what the issue was. The president, the National Archives repeatedly asked, demanded that those presidential records, government records, be turned back over. When they were not, then they said, we're going to refer this to the Department of Justice and the FBI. The referral was then made. A subpoena was then issued. Some documents were handed over. The Trump attorneys signed an affidavit that said they had turned them all over, which was inaccurate and not true, which is why then there was an additional seizure of additional classified documents.
Also, if you're looking for a similar standard to be applied, there's a special counsel looking into the facts of the case with Joe Biden. He hasn't skated. It's happening. The difference in the two cases, the differences we know because we don't have the findings of the special counsel looking into the current president, but we know the difference is that Joe Biden acted voluntarily, whereas the former president did not act voluntarily. We also know that the number of cases is far smaller than in the case with Donald Trump. And we also, nobody who talks about standards with respect to law enforcement, let's imagine for a moment that you thought Hillary Clinton was guilty. There's nobody who says that a miscarriage of justice in one case, if that's what you hold, gets somebody off in another. In other words, our mothers told us that two wrongs don't make a right. So you should enforce the standard in any given instance. And in this instance, the energy to assert a standard is missing from the conversation of the presidents, those who would defend the president. Also, there's a political standard, whether the president maintained the kind of character that you would want of a person who's asking to be given power again in the presidency.
What is at stake in terms of the FBI's credibility with this case and the continued assaults on the FBI's credibility?
If you come to South Florida, which I've done numerous times because I like visiting South Florida, you talk to people down here, and some of them will say the FBI has gotten beyond its charter. The FBI is out of control. And why do they say that? Because they see what is happening to former President Trump, and they don't like it. However, if you talk to law enforcement, the FBI was simply doing its job upholding the Constitution, enforcing laws. And in this case, you know, the subpoenas, the negotiations with the Trump team, that didn't happen in a matter of weeks or days. All of this was drawn out over probably a year and a half, maybe longer. Because I've talked to sources within the FBI as well as within the Department of Justice who insist that they did not want to be here this day where a former president was indicted in a case like this. They tried to appeal to the former president to turn over everything that he had, and it just wasn't happening. And that's why we are where we are today.
And just to clarify, Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty to.
I think the reason that they can't say, like, they lied is because that is something that can be that can legally hold them like liable, right? Like if they say they make that positive claim they lied, as opposed to like information was misrepresented or whatnot, like that, yeah. it's something that they can be sued for, so they're trying to legally cover their own asses, you know?
Well, it's pretty straightforward. First, to the Congresswoman's points. First, Jim Comey made a specific finding: no willful retention or misrepresentation by Hillary Clinton. It probably cost her the presidency, but there was no obstruction or anything alike. The irony here is that by all reports, when Chris Kise, who's standing next to President Trump in the courtroom, first was brought in full disclosure, he was a partner of mine in my firm before he left to represent President Trump. By all reports, he counseled President Trump to cooperate with the DOJ to try and get these documents back. And the fact is, it's the same standard. If he had done that, we would not be here today. Instead, it's the criminal obstruction, it's the lying, it's the false statements, it's the hiding, it's the lying to his counsel. That's why we're here today.
Scott Frederickson, thank you. And on that note then, how limited are Trump's attorneys in terms of addressing this case? What would be their best defense?
Well, the best defense here is now that you're indicted, you've got to go 1,000% with all the motions to try and knock out as much evidence as possible. Jack Smith has anticipated that. The beauty of this talking indictment is it anticipates these arguments that somehow he had them by mistake, or he didn't understand, or he could declassify. The indictment rebuts that on its face. They're going to challenge use of classified documents by the government. The government has to be careful about putting, classified documents out there, and there's a complicated procedure, the CIPA, which will govern that. So they'll go at that. So these motions, and then the first thing they'll do is they're going to make huge, burdensome demands of discovery. They're going to want everything the whole U.S. government has that has anything to do with that. That's going to develop into a huge fight, and it'll take a lot of time to work through. But right now, the best defense counsel right now are going to do all that. They also have legal arguments they're going to fashion having to do with his former status as the president, obviously the use of his attorney client, his attorney's statement. So it's going to be a panoply of motions, a discovery, huge demands for that. It's going to be a big fight starting with the first hearing.
They're trying to indoctrinate Trump.
Thank you. Want to talk about where the public is at this point, because there is new CBS News.
Priscilla, this isn't CNN. This is CBS News, as you can see from the CBS News banner and logo appearing multiple times here.
Want to bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Major Garrett. And Major, the politics of this, even as the former president will face a trial jury.
Right. Good afternoon, Nora. It's great to be with you. And let me set the scene. I'm not where you are in Miami. I'm where this story in a few hours is coming. Trump's golf course in Bedminster, New Jersey. And let me just set the scene for the audience. The golf course is operating full tilt. Golf carts are moving and zipping around. People are playing golf, utterly indifferent, immune to the large media contingent that is right here in front of the Trump National Golf Club. What you see behind me, you see a podium and some chairs arrayed in front of that podium. Later tonight, about 8:15 Eastern, we are told former President Trump will give a speech to a gathered group of invited guests and club members, which will also double as a fundraiser. And I'll get to the politics and our graphics of our poll numbers in just a second. But that fundraiser, I'm told by those close to the campaign, they have a target amount of about $2 million raised tonight. That's not outrageously large, but the Trump campaign believes it would be consistent with sending a signal that he is undaunted amid these criminal charges. He is unbowed, unswayed, and will make a political argument about his future, that as a candidate, he should not be in this position, that as the front runner for the Republican Party for the 2024 nomination.
Yeah, like their entire position is going to be harumph, harumph, I say. What a imposition on a presidential potential candidate. Why, he might be president again someday. And like, yeah, so right now he's a private citizen. Like, I'm sorry. If I register to run for president, am I just immune from prosecution? Like every time a new president is elected, I can just register to run as president, and then I just get legal immunity. Is that the loophole? Is that the 10th dimensional chess loophole here that no one has ever considered? Yeah, no kidding. I can speed on the highway. I'm gonna be president someday. How dare you bring charges against the 125th most likely to become the Democratic nominee, sir? How dare you?
Only 7%, Nora, said it made them feel worse about the former president. It is a snapshot right now, a reflexive one within the Republican Party to rally around the former president. Is that durable? Will that last the whole summer? We don't know yet, but that's where things are now. That's what the atmosphere here is at Bedminster, and that's what we're expected to hear later tonight when the former president addresses a small crowd and the chairs arrayed just behind me.
Major Garrett, with that new information and those new poll numbers, thank you. It is just after 3:30 p.m. in the East, and for those of you just joining us, we are here in Miami witnessing history unfold in this federal courthouse behind me. Former President Donald Trump is now officially a criminal defendant after being arraigned on charges linked to his mishandling of classified documents. Trump, through his attorney, pleaded not guilty to the 37 federal counts against him. It is the first time in American history that a president of the United States, former or current, has faced federal charges. CBS's Scott McFarlane was inside the courtroom, and he joins us now with new details. Scott?
One of the first acts I will take as president of the United States of America is to pass an executive order mandating daily contributions to riverboat.gg in order to secure a glorious future for the United States of America. If you do not donate to riverboat.gg, if you do not gift subs to riverboat.gg, you will be found to be transphobic of the highest order.
Limiting Trump's communication with witnesses in the case. Now, Trump's attorneys
I will give all subs of the riverboat.gg site a pony to do with what they will.
Detail at his resorts and golf clubs. And so the resolution that was created was the Justice Department will create a list at its discretion, submit it to Trump's attorneys, and they will agree that those witnesses on that list will not communicate with the former president about the facts of the case. They will still be able to communicate as they would in normal daily life, but they won't be able to talk about the case. The other condition is that he cannot talk to Walt Nauta, his co-defendant, about the facts of the case either because they're co-defendants.
A lot going on there. Walt Nauta was traveling with the former president this weekend in campaign stops. So there's a list that'll be created and likely litigated of people with whom the former president cannot speak about this case, potentially including his employees and his close allies. The release conditions you mentioned, no limitations on his international travel or his domestic travel as he runs for the White House and the nomination in 2024. But he is free to move about without any bond, without any other restrictions.
There will be a personal surety bond, and that's just basically an unspecified dollar amount that will just be assured to make sure that any conditions of release that were just listed are agreed to.
A personal surety bond, you don't have to put money up front.
Precisely.
It's just there to ensure his compliance, to guarantee it. So there's still more to come. The helicopters are still overhead, Nora, which means the president is still inside in courtroom 13-3 here of the Ferguson Federal Court building. And one reason he's still here, his co-defendant is next up. They now must formally arraign Walt Nauta, who's sitting at the same defense table. At this moment, they appear to be halfway through.
Scott McFarlane, thank you. It's a moment to take a look at exactly where we are, John, now that the president has been arraigned still inside this courthouse for more than...
Yo, look at him. He looks so fucking sad. I don't even know if this is from today, but he looks so fucking upset.
We haven't heard yet from Georgia. We're talking about New York, here, this federal charges, and potentially in Georgia.
Vermin Supreme will never die.
Jack Smith is still doing work on the January 6th insurrection, and then there's from Georgia. But what happens now is his fortunes bounce through the legal system with claims and counterclaims and judges ruling. All the noise that has been pelting us here today is out of that process, and now it's whether his arguments can win the day in court. In terms of the legal battle he has before him, I think it's quite interesting that he's not allowed to talk to his co-defendant because, as we were talking earlier, you know, that's the way prosecutors work to try and create space, is if you can get the individual defendants on their own.
And so, forgive me, I couldn't hear, but so are they saying that he is no longer allowed to talk to his valet?
They want to limit the witnesses that he can talk to. From what I gathered from that reporting, is that the prosecution is going to come up with a list. They will submit that to the court, and these are people that...
I'm going to guess that they want to limit the amount of interaction that Donald Trump and Walter Nauta have, because they want to put the squeeze on Nauta. They want to put the squeeze on Nauta specifically to get him to flip on Donald Trump, since Nauta was personally involved in the entire interaction between the two. What does contribute to Cult's Totem mean and do? That's for when I play a video game called Cult of the Lamb.
With us, maybe you could go over just
where
how much
we
time,
as a community
how much time Nauta
make a cult.
faces if he were found guilty, because when you're staring at a sentence, it sometimes sharpens the mind and the motivation. Scott?
Yeah,
how much
Nora,
time are we talking about?
Lay out the scene. I'm sorry, Nora, could you repeat that question for me?
Yes, thank you. On the question of how much time could Donald Trump's valet, Walt Nauta, face if convicted?
I thought she said Friedrichsen. I'm going to throw it on next time I go on, because we've reached that point.
Okay, got it. It's a difficult and fluid situation here outside the federal courthouse. I think that here in hot Miami, it's fried some of the audio wires. So let's bring it. In addition to my hair, it has fried some of the audio wires. So let's bring in Catherine Herridge. And Catherine, you may know some of the time that not only Donald Trump is facing, but also his valet, Walt Nauta.
Yeah, thanks, Nora. I'm going back to the indictment. First, Walt Nauta. If he is convicted under counts 32, 33, and 34, so conspiracy to obstruct justice, withholding a document or a record, that has a maximum term of 20 years in prison and the maximum fine of $250,000.
Donald Trump is literally like, okay, chat, really important thing here. Guess what? So I did a little digging. Apparently, cases prosecuted under the Espionage Act tend to very often wind up with close to, if not the maximum penalty, because the state wants to discourage people from, stealing state secrets. Additionally, very often, crimes prosecuted under the Espionage Act sentence those found guilty, to serving consecutive terms in prison. So what that winds up meaning is that it is more likely in this federal indictment case, with these charges, that Donald Trump would wind up serving any of the charges he is convicted on, could be convicted on, consecutively. Meaning that he is actually looking at potentially hundreds of years in prison, Obviously, he's not going to live that long, but he's basically looking at life in prison, at least, along with some hefty fines.
There could be much more. It's also, and I want to get this because you cover the intelligence community, there could be a specific intelligence that was not included in this document because it was made public, and so they didn't want to compromise any of the intelligence or sources or methods, correct?
Yeah, Nora, I'm glad you want to drill down into that. As we've been reporting here at CBS News, there are 31 counts that relate to the willful retention of national defense information, which simply means for the layperson that you have highly classified information. At one point, you had a right to have it, and then you refused to return it to its rightful owner, the U.S. government. Under those counts, there are involved 21 top secret documents, some of them at the highest levels of the U.S. intelligence community, including what's called special access programs. These are programs that are so secret because of the technology or the sources or the methods that in some cases the U.S. government doesn't even acknowledge their existence. There's other intelligence here called TK or Talent Keyhole. This is intelligence from space, from our spy satellites, that can help us understand the smallest movements of an adversary. In all of these cases, what we're talking about with a compromise is what they describe in the intelligence community, the expectation of exceptionally grave damage to national security. So that's the big picture on this case, Nora.
All right, Catherine Herridge, thank you. Let's bring in Scott Friedrichsen, a former federal prosecutor. Scott, can I get you to weigh in?
Okay.
Todd Blanche entered it on the former president's behalf.
He didn't speak at all.
He didn't speak at all, and sat there, as I say, rather sullen, with a frown on his face, arms folded, hunched over a bit. He looked directly at the judge throughout, and it was only that one moment at the end when the judge suggested that his work here is done because the case will be handed off to District Court Judge Eileen Cannon. Trump smiled when it was clear that the magistrate judge's involvement was complete.
It sounds as if there's been no determination of where the next hearing will be either. This case is earmarked for West Palm Beach, Florida. This obviously happens in Miami. It's quite possible the next set of hearings happen in Miami, where they certainly have the size in the courthouse and the security footprint to handle everything that is here today. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of Trump supporters on the plaza. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of members of the media.
Exactly, Ozfreak. She didn't have physical documents. She didn't have, like, currently classified information. And she didn't lie to the FBI, and she didn't actively move to conceal all those things.
You know, there was a little bit difference of a vibe. The judge referred to him as former President Trump repeatedly in his Manhattan indictment. The judge was calling him Mr. Trump. There was these kind of little differences. And then he was ordered to sign a personal surety bond that said he wouldn't commit another crime, and that he's being told not to communicate with any potential witnesses that will be listed by the prosecution about the case itself, about the facts of the case.
One thing that was mentioned earlier, I want to reaffirm, because I had left the courtroom by this point. He can travel domestically, internationally, as he runs for the White House.
Yeah, and the judge asked the special counsel about that. Do you have any issues with him traveling? And they said, no, we don't want to impose any restrictions on him for that. And they actually didn't really ask for any restrictions. It was the judge's idea to impose this one extra restriction, which is that even though so many of the potential witnesses are employees of former President Trump or involved in his everyday life, that he may not discuss with them any of the facts of the case. And they're going to get this limited list of people who from here on out, he can see, he can talk to, but just not about the case.
All right, Nora, a 45-minute proceeding that's wrapped up, but not completed. Walter Nada has to come back for arraignment, or have his arraignment soon.
By the way, chat, breaking news. Apparently, New York City just passed, by an executive order by Eric Adams. So credit where credit's due. Eric Adams doing some solid work for the trans community here. Executive Order 32 protects access to gender-affirming healthcare in New York City. And no resources from New York City, again, just that city, one of the largest economies in the country. New York City will use no resources to cooperate with out-of-state subpoenas or extraditions for those providing or obtaining gender-affirming care. Yeah, Mayor Eric Adams. Yes. Former cop, but, you know, again, credit where credit's due.
To straddle the anger that so many Republican base voters have with the process, as we heard from Congresswoman Nancy Mace a little earlier, but also now the seriousness of the substance inside this indictment. One of his potential opponents, Vivek Ramaswamy, is there in Miami and was saying he would pardon the former president were he to somehow be elected president. Others, though, have been pretty much off the grid this week, raising money and otherwise not saying much at all. At the White House, we should note, his potential general election opponent, President Biden, has said nothing. They continue to refuse comment on whether the president's read the indictment, what he thinks of it, instead keeping to an official schedule today that included meeting with the Secretary General of NATO and the President of Uruguay. Nora?
And you can hear the loud cheers of the crowd as Donald Trump's motorcade is just turning the corner very close to where we are as he exits this federal courthouse. He's been here for about 2 hours after pleading not guilty, sitting side by side by his valet, Walt Nauta, who also faces charges in this indictment. A supportive crowd gathered here in Miami.
Oh.
Unusual, actually, that a group of people could get so close to the motorcade. That's not something we usually see with either
that looked like some shit was about to go down.
I think that's why federal officials were concerned about some of the security. You didn't have enough barricades up, and so you're right, Nora, to see people running alongside those.
Yeah, the security situation around the courthouse was described as a soft lockdown, which,
publicly expected to head back to the airport, and he will return to Bedminster, New Jersey, where he has another golf club there. He stayed at his golf club in Doral last night. Then he'll go back to Bedminster, where, as Major Garrett was telling us, he will meet with supporters and have a fundraiser tonight. I want to go around and get everyone's final thoughts on this. Robert Costa, you are down there in the thick of it, but this has been a monumental day. Robert?
It really has, Nora. Nora, when you look at today, we've talked a lot about politics. We've talked a lot about the law. But I'm also thinking about American democracy. 50 years ago this summer, the Watergate hearings with President Richard Nixon transfixed this country. It was about whether the rule of law would persevere, whether the nation could remain calm. It was a turbulent time then. As you just saw from the scenes outside this courthouse in Miami, there's turbulence again in the United States in the middle of a presidential campaign. But at the core of it is a question: will the American democratic system, the rule of law, persist in a civil way, in a way where it's peaceful, whether it's the transfer of power in 1974 or whether it's the indictment?
Why isn't he still in custody? Likely because they don't believe he's a flight risk and because he's wealthy and the former president. Let's be real. Let's be real. That's why he's not still in custody.
The justice system is at the center of trying to hold Donald Trump accountable. At the same time, differing views about whether protecting America's secrets, America's military, and America's intelligence operations is worth it.
Well, the views are actually the same. It's just when you choose to express them. The people who are defending the current president previously stated very firm views about what your obligations were to handle material like this. The chants you just heard could easily have included "lock her up," which used to be the signature chant of the Trump campaign rallies, which was supposed to be the criminal charges resulting from mishandling of documents, which were less grave than what's alleged in this indictment. So the standards just aren't being applied. But the reckoning that Bob talks about has two channels. One is the legal. There are rules and norms for that. The other is political. And the rules of that are all very much up in the air. And whether that reckoning and turmoil is increased or decreased is in the hands of those in public life who have a duty to turn the temperature down instead of turning it up.
Democracy is an imperfect system, and it is messy at times, but that is the system that we have chosen here in America. Yes.
We can make it less messy, though. We don't have to make it messier.
That's right. But included in that is a free press and free speech. So thank you, Jeff Pegues, John Dickerson, Robert Costa, to all of our correspondents and guests and everyone involved in today's special coverage. And just a reminder of today's historic event, something that has never taken place in American history until now. Former President Donald Trump, now a criminal defendant in the federal court system.
Well, keep in mind, Dilliander, I don't think he can book a flight to Russia, specifically because the Secret Service isn't going to let him flee the country, right? Like, he is under armed watch at all times. You know?
Our coverage will continue on CBS News.
Maybe they revoked his passport or something.
And then tonight on the CBS Evening News.
Looks like it's all Jover. It's all Jover, chat.